Yep. All right. Easements and other non-possessory rights. Okay, this is the thing that we talked about. What is an easement? And we call it non-possessory because you don't own an easement. You have the right to use an easement. Let's turn it on. Sorry about that. You have a right to use an easement, but what is the actual easement? It's non-possessory. For a while, I did some consulting with Duke Energy, and we were getting easements. So think about all the power poles that you see around the city. Everything that runs down the road is what we call transmission lines. So there's easements, but those easements are in the right-of-way of the street. Whenever you buy a piece of real estate, actually you kind of own to the middle of the street. But the street and the sidewalk and the public land is considered right-of-way. You pay real estate taxes on it, the village, the city, whatever, takes care of the street. You as the property owner have to take care of the sidewalk if there's a sidewalk. The power, telephone poles and everything, the power and utility companies take care of those. But those are called transmission lines, what runs down the road. What runs across land is distribution lines. So I worked in this group where we were doing distribution lines. And distribution lines, we'd have to go get easements from people. We want the right to be able to cross your property. So we pay people for that, $10,000, $15,000, because when we cross over your property as Duke, we want the right to be able to have that line on your property, to be able to come in and maintain the line as we want, but we also say you can't build anything under the line. You can farm under it, but you can't build a structure under it. So for this easement, we're paying you for the rights to use your land, but we don't own it. Duke doesn't own it, they just get easements. But they pay you for the right to not do anything under it, is basically what they're doing.
So every resale, every owner gets...
The easements run with the land. So it's one time done, but it stays with the land. So they only pay one time, the owner they negotiate with. Yes. Okay, so that's what that whole department did, was just negotiating for easements to be able to do this. And I'm working right now on an easement for the streets where I'm at, for power poles, for just the lines that come down to support a power pole so it doesn't rock and move. They're support lines. And the utility company's going to pay me $1,000. And then I had to go back to the asset manager, well, why do we got to do an easement? This is a street, it's the right of way. I said, yeah, but it's a private street. This is not a dedicated street. We own it, we maintain it as part of Streets of Westchester. We have to paint it, take care of it, plow it, everything. And therefore, they want an easement. It's not right-of-way. It's in what would be considered right-of-way if it was a public street, but it's not a public street. So they have to do the easement with us. So by lolling around and not getting things done, finally she said, well, we'll pay you $1,000 for it. All this is to put 2 tension wires in, and they'll pay us $1,000. So, and my asset manager said, that's fair, because it cost him $1,000 to have an attorney review it. So he's just getting paid for the attorney. So it's not really gain, but it's money to come back. So we have easements. We're going to define the rights that are created by an easement. We're going to talk about the different ways to create them. We're going to talk about transferability. Easements run with the land. They stay with the land. How do they transfer? We're going to talk about the advantages of granting an easement, how the easements are enforced, and the differences between the licenses and profits. So again, it's a non-possessory easement because you're not given a deed, but it actually is a legal description that gets recorded against the land. It's interest in land that constitutes less than full possession or ownership, and it can be temporary or permanent. Easements typically are permanent. They run with the land. So if you give somebody, you live on the beach, you have beachfront property, and you give your neighbor across the street the right to cross through your property to get to the beach, and they've been doing it for years. It's not a paved walk, it's not in a fence, or it's not really marked other than the dirt trail that everybody's walked on for years. That's an easement. Because you've let these people do this for years. You've given up the right to take that back. And that'll pass on to the next owners. Even though it's not of record, the way to preserve it is to make it of record and record it and actually do a legal description. So we have types, we have easements, profits, licenses, and covenants. Covenants are things that when you buy a piece of land like the shopping center we own, or you buy a piece of land that's in a neighborhood development and you have rules, are the covenants. of the land, how you can use it, what you can do with it. Those are what are the covenants, the rules of the land. But it's kind of an easement because you're giving somebody the right to dictate to you how and what you can do with it. So, easement is a right to use another's land for a specific purpose. Like I said, walking through the beach, running a utility line, that's an easement. Classifications, we have their affirmative or negative. So sometimes they positively impact the property, sometimes they negatively impact the property. And they can be what's called an appurtenant or in gross. Easements in gross is what the utility is. It runs through lots of property. It's an easement in gross. Appurtenant is just through your own single property. Transferability, again, depends upon whether it's an easement, appurtenant, or in gross as to how it also gets transferred and recorded. Now I can tell you, honestly, the utility company, when they pay us that $1,000, the very next thing they're going to do is take that and record it somewhere. It will be of record because they want to preserve their rights. They never want to have to go through all this. I mean, they had to pay a surveyor, they had to document, they had to create this document of what we're signing, and they want to record it so it's always a public record. Creation of easements. They can be created by a grant, which is what we'll do. We're going to sign a document that's going to grant that to them. Through the estoppel, which is a type of a document that's done, they're created by necessity. You sell that piece of land and you block somebody's access, they have to come across your land to get access, you're creating a necessity to cross your land. Implication or prescription. There's, again, different ways that they're created. I'll let you read about some of them again. If you have questions after you read them. Again, don't get really hung up on, oh, what's this, what's that. Your general questions about easements and what you need to know about easements for the test is going to be that easements exist and why do we have easements. That's pretty much the basis of what you really need to know for the law test. It's not a whole lot more detailed. This chapter is going to go into a lot of details. Easements by grant, again, by express agreement. They're typically created by a deed or some other legal document, but we don't, even though we might deed it to them, they're not paying taxes on it. You as the property owner continue to pay taxes on it. So they don't really own it per se. They're subject to the statute of frauds. So again, that's why we put them in writing, because we want it to be recorded. We want it to be a written conveyance of land. It has to be in writing in Ohio. We have express grants or express reservations. Easements by estoppel arise when the conduct of an owner of a land leads another to believe that the other person had an easement. Again, not recognized in all states, sometimes referred to as irrevocable licenses. Again, we gave somebody the impression that they had an easement. They've been using our land and we've allowed it to go on. Did they really need it? Was it required? What are we doing it? What's the intent behind it? Those are the things we're looking at, this estoppel piece. By necessity, recognize when an owner conveys land to another which there is no access except over the grantor's adjacent property or over the land of strangers. The conveyed land is typically landlocked. That's how we know it was done by necessity. The majority require that a party prove 4 elements for an easement by necessity. Unity of ownership prior to division of the property, so one person owned it all. Division of the property and transfer of the one estate. Strict or absolute necessity, and necessity is continuous. Those are the things that they're going to look for the 4 elements of this easement by necessity. By implication, an easement is implied by a prior or pre-existing use. It's gone on for a long time. They arise where prior to a unified tract being divided, the landowner used one section of the tract in a way that benefited the other portions of the land. So the requirements of this one is unity of ownership, division of the property, transfer. Prior use existed at the time of the division, and the easement was important and reasonably necessary. Again, all these little tests, this is all the stuff you need to remember for this class, but you really will not need it for the test, the state test. And when I give you a test on this chapter, I'm not going to ask a lot of these hard questions. Again, this is really covering a lot of ground to get you to really intensively understand it. Don't freak out. Easement by prescription, similar to adverse possession, available only on private property. And we'll talk about what adverse possession is. When somebody takes another's property adversely without their permission and is using it, they do so continuously for a period of years, that's adverse possession. They don't go up to them and say, dude, I'm going to use your land whether you like it or not. What they do is they just do it. And they don't ask approval and they don't ask permission. And they just do it. That's adverse possession. I used to think adverse possession also meant that they paid the taxes on it. That's not at all the rule. It's just they continuously use it. And they have adverse for 15 to 20 years. It's a long period of time to get adverse possession. It's kind of like, I'm trying to think, homesteading. We used to go get homestead lots. You sit on it, park on it for 7 years, and it was yours. That was what homesteading was. So requirements is adverse to landowner. Again, open and notorious and continuous for a statutory period. That's easement by prescription. Scopes of easements. So we can have use and intensity changes. Easement holders may use the easement for what is reasonably convenient or necessary to fully enjoy the purpose of the easement. So think about what they're doing with it, how they got to do it. The holder of an easement obtains rights over the servient estate owner. So the servient is the one we cross over. The dominant is the one that benefits from the easement. So if I'm on this piece of property behind somebody, I have to cross over the servient and I'm the dominant in the back. That's how we describe the difference, servient and dominant. The servient estate owner loses the ability to have unrestricted use of his or her property because they're letting somebody else dominate and come over their property. The use, the maintenance, and repair. Terms of an express easement often control the duties of repair and maintenance. So express, I granted it, but in my granting provisions, I may say who's actually responsible for taking care of it. That might be part of that whole granting document. It spells it all out. If there's no such agreement or if the agreement is silent, then the dominant estate has the affirmative duty to maintain the easement in good repair. So I cross over your land. I had to put a driveway over your land to get back to my property. I got to take care of the driveway. It's on your land, but it's benefiting me. So it's my maintenance responsibility. Again, who's it benefiting? The servient owner has no duty to contribute toward the cost of the maintenance or repair, although the servient estate party must allow reasonable access for the required repairs. So these utility easements and stuff I have on these properties, these shopping centers I have, and we get paid for the easement to drive across and all that kind of stuff, they have the right to use them. They're the dominant. They benefit from it. But because the way they're granted and the way we've done the document, it's my responsibility to maintain. I'm collecting user fees. But again, I've spelled that all out in the document that I've done. So it's a little bit different because it's a commercial endeavor. That was the intent all along, was to be able to collect fees for maintaining, and you get access. So I got a guy who's not paying right now. I'm about ready to call him and say, dude, what's your tenant going to do when I put a roadblock up? Seriously, he hasn't paid his easement. His tenant's going to sue him. His tenants, because they're a commercial enterprise. They got to let their customers in. So I haven't made that threat yet, but I think I'm going to do it one of these days to make him pay his bill. And we're not talking a lot of money. We're talking $450. Just got to get him to pay. Termination of easements. They can be terminated by achievement of the purpose of their creation, by a merger. One property owner crosses over another property owner's property. All of a sudden, now that two property owners becomes one. Somebody bought all the property. So that's that merger, what we're talking about. There's no longer two property owners, so they don't need to have easements anymore. They just use their own property. So that's what a merger is. I had a situation in Marymount, town square there. Had a building, and the guy next to us owned the driveway coming down, and he wanted to cut off our access. I repaved the back portion that's our parking lot. He got all mad at me, and when he told me he was going to cut off access, so when we repaved the portion, we painted on their fire lane. And we bought some signs and put them on the side of the building and said fire lane. And the fire department said, you can't cut off their access. It's a fire lane. I said, yeah, it's a fire lane. He held that against me forever. The guy would never hire me after that. But I beat him at his game. But over time, and the whole thing was, is I kept saying to him, dude, why don't you just buy the property? The 4 storefronts. Finally, today, he owns it all. So it's a merger. There's no longer an easement exists. Doesn't have to, because he owns all the property. Abandonment, yeah.
What happens like on a situation like that Staples, let's say Staples goes out of business and it stays empty.
Mm-hmm.
Does the next owner that comes in have to take what that contract is, or
Uh-huh.
do you have to redo?
No, the owner that comes in will take that contract.
Okay.
That's a contract that runs with the land.
Okay, it doesn't, you can't renegotiate it.
So here's what happened. When I went and took control of that property, we had 450 pages of easements. I paid Chicago Title $450 to pull it all for me. I couldn't read most of the documents. Over time, they've been copied, and they were fuzzy. And I knew that it would take me weeks to go to the courthouse and pull documents. But if you go to a title company, those guys know how to do it because they do it all the time. So I paid them $450 for 450 pages of documents. I went back to the far end user, which is a AAA tire store, and AAA deal, AAA. They've got a tire store and a service place there. And I said to them, I said, you owe us money. What do you mean you owe us money? I said, there's an easement. We don't know that. I'm sure you do. Go back to your title, and you'll see that your property was built, and there was an easement of record. It's of record. It's there. It's just the prior owners never enforced it. So for 10 years, Kimco owned the property, and they didn't enforce it. So I went back to AAA, and I said, I'm going to enforce it, but I'm not going to enforce it for 10 years they owned it. I'm just going to enforce it back to when we purchased it in 2015. This was last year, so I went back 2 years. So they owed us a couple $1,000s. But it was of record. So when Staples goes out of business, it goes dark and that building sits there, the next owners will do a title search. And it may sell in a bankruptcy. We don't know how to sell, but they'll do a title search, and that's when it'll come up of record.
Does the $15 continue though for years when it's vacant?
Yes. Well, what happens is it's kind of like a tax. It will go back and ask for the money because we haven't cut off their access. And then the increase is 15% every 5 years. Yes, it keeps growing.
Even though nobody's there?
Yeah. It's still growing in time. Yeah, we can still go back and get it. And then we found out the property down the hill wasn't paying either. So I got a few thousand off of that one too. So my $450 absolutely paid for itself. It was well worth the investment to have somebody pull the paperwork for me to see what it was. The property owner down the hill from us, it was a Gander Mountain, and now that's being sold to somebody else. Camping World's coming in. Camping World also bought some property from the city. And so now I'm having talks with the city. What I'd love to be able to do with that road, I want to dedicate it to them. I want to donate to the city and let them make it a dedicated road. Guess what? All the easements will be torn up. We don't need them anymore. If it's a public road, nobody has to pay to maintain it because tax dollars are paying to maintain it. And the city they have to improve the road too. It's a parking lot, it's not a road. But there's trucks that go down to do deliveries and other things like that, and especially with the Camping World. All kinds of vehicles be going down there. So it makes sense to be able to do that. Again, this is something that'll take time to do, but I've already had the discussions with the city manager to try to start.
So with your various easements on this one private road, it's not a profit center for you?
It is a profit center, but we pay to maintain it. There's potholes every.
Right, that's what I'm saying. In general, though, it's a net loss for you to have to maintain it.
It's a net loss for us to have to maintain it. Yes, and that's why they pay us. So where it comes in, we're more than happy to give the city the property, let them make it a dedicated road. Then I don't have to maintain it. I don't have to do snow removal on it anymore either. Let them take care of it. Yes, it's very much a net loss for us to have to repair and maintain it. But it was built as part of the whole development at the time, in '94 when they built it. So it made sense at the time.
Why would they say that to that though? Like, couldn't they just like when you know what I mean? Like, why would they agree to it?
Well, the road behind us at Westchester, I've asked the county to take that, and they said, well, we'll get back to you. I'm not counting it. I'm not holding my breath.
Yeah.
But there are more people that access the road than when it was originally developed. There's a property on the other side, apartments and stuff, that have a bridge that come over, and they use it as a main point of access. It used to just be our own private property. Now somebody else is accessing it, and that's the same with this in Huber Heights. They've sold property down the road. Somebody else is accessing it, and actually the city bought the piece below us, so they're actually having to access it as well.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah. So abandonment, again, so if we abandon the easement, it's no longer being maintained or taken care of, we can call it quits. Incompatible acts, written release, destruction of the serving estate, so the primary estate gets destroyed. And that can be if the house burns down and there's no value in it anymore. There's still a plot of land, but something can happen. How does a piece of land get destroyed? I actually figured it out. Can anybody think of how a piece of land would get destroyed?
Sinkhole.
Exactly, sinkhole. Yeah, so if there's a sinkhole, but you know what we can do? We can fill sinkholes in, but who's going to want to build on that sinkhole property again? Not if everybody knows about it. No matter how much you engineer that dang thing, you're not going to get somebody to pay for it again. But so that it took me until last year to figure out sinkholes is the way to destroy a piece of property. You can't destroy it much, but you can do that. And so eminent domain would also terminate an easement when it becomes public property for eminent domain or it's taken. Conservation easements. Promote the preservation of land and properly drawn that can serve as a tax planning strategy of the grantor. Absolutely, they're tax planning strategies. That's why people are doing them. When I did historic facade easements with the Inquiry Building downtown, that was a conservation easement to call them historic facades, and my owners got a $1.6 million tax credit for doing it that year. So yeah, that's very much tax planning. Only the grantor or grantee may enforce the conservation easement. Some courts have defined conservation easements as an interest in real property equivalent to a fee simple estate. Again, you got to be careful how you draw it up. When we did a conservation easement where you do these, you have a lot of legal assistance to write them up and make sure they're done so they're not viewed the wrong way. And make sure that your state is a state that accepts this. Conservation easements. Streets of Westchester. I managed it when it was a farm. There was 13 property owners. We all got together to plan for the interchange to be cut through the farm. And we had one holdout of the 13. He said, I don't care what you do. Nobody's ever going to develop my property. And he did a conservation easement. He's saying that it's going to be staying green forever. And that's just because he doesn't want to see development. He wants to stay green forever, and he can do that. He bought his little place, and he wanted to stay green and pretty. He built a little house and a shed back there. He has every right to do that. But what happens with conservation easements, we'll talk about how it can come back to the property owner or to the family if the conservation group stops maintaining it. They stop taking care of it, stop keeping
How's
it.
it any different from you who doesn't want Lunkin to?
It's no different. It's
Yeah.
no different. He has his little
Yeah.
piece of it's his little peaceful place. He wants it to stay that way all the time. It's just, you have to understand, when we came to the meetings and started doing land planning, I don't care what happens, you're going to do this. And we're all going, what do you mean? Our property's worth millions of dollars. Of course we're going to do it. He didn't want the million. He didn't care about it.
How big is that plot of land that he's on?
Probably 10 acres. It's a decent size. But it's going to be this little green hole, and all around him is apartments and condos developing now in commercial
There's
property.
like a little house in front of like a big
Oh, in
Where's
Seattle.
that?
Seattle.
The one where there's like a single house
Yeah.
and this huge wall around it, and then there's like a concrete wall up.
And you'll see that in Florida, you'll see that in Chicago, New York, and different places where the one property owner doesn't want to participate and be part of it, and they hold out and they do their own little
It's that
thing.
movie Up.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, well,
They-
there's up to, yeah. But,
No,
like,
that story came from
mm,
Seattle. That's that person. It's based on a true story.
But why would you
Yeah.
want to live there if there's like a mall around you, and that makes no sense.
At some point in time, you give it up. Really, but not everybody wants to do it. And again, okay, this is our right to own our property and control our property. We have that right.
My dad used to live down on like West Fork, right, like before you go on the north side.
Uh-huh.
And the city bought up like all the houses along like the Mill Creek, but our neighbor's house, like he refused to sell it, and it's literally like the only house down there.
And it floods.
Yeah.
And we're like, why did you do it, dude?
He just won't give it up. I like drive by it there, and it's still.
And it wasn't a whole hell of a lot of money, but they were trying to do it because the city didn't want people to have to carry flood insurance for a waterway that's going to happen there all the time. And they really changed that whole area because they brought coal rain down into it and stuff.
There's houses over there, but it's just like land, random house, just a big level.
Mhm. I used to drive it all the time to go to Putz's. Because my twin was in Northside. She raised her family there, so we go to Putz's all the time. I can tell you just about, if you drive east, it's insane. We're just about every creamy whip is. Just a thing of mine. So profits. It's a right to enter another land and take something from the land. So it can be considered a right derived from the law of easements. And it's classified as an appurtenant or engross. So the right to enter land and take something from that land. What are we going to take from that land? We can take the crop. We can take the tree. We can take the dirt. When they were building the interchange on where the streets of Westchester is, the township came, or the TID, Transportation Improvement District, came to me and said, we want to do a borrow pit. We want to borrow dirt off your property and move it up so we can put this ramp and build our interchange. About a week later, I went back to him and I said, borrow pit? Hell, you guys aren't going to borrow my dirt. You're taking it. It's not a borrow pit because you're not bringing it back. But they called it, terminology was a borrow pit. I'm like, you can't have it because this land's already in floodplain. We can't give you any more dirt that we need just to be able to develop someday. So we didn't. We let them go across the way and get the dirt. Very expensive process to get dirt. So that's how you can take the profit off somebody's land, by literally taking it. Licenses, again, the right to enter property of another particular purpose, usually temporary and revocable at the will of the landowner. Okay, so you bought a ticket to Reds game. The Reds game got rained out. What do Reds tell you? Hopefully they'll give you a ticket for another day, but they also say, no, you're not coming tonight. We're closing the park down.
No, most of the time they leave it open for the 2 hours. They can. So I work at the Red.
In case, yes, they come back.
They do that. That's how they get you to spend the money, and then they're like, "Oh, you can come back another day, and we'll do it again."
Yeah, and you can buy your $3 or $5 bottle of water and do all that while we're here.
Yeah, no, they spend a lot more money.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's hilarious.
They keep the vending machine.
I'm like, yeah, and I stay back here for nothing.
Everything's open because they want to sell. Yep, big sell. Covenants. Unconditional promise to another, contractual promise that binds subsequent owners of the property so the promise is made. Okay, they can be affirmative or negative. Like I said, covenants happen when we buy condominiums or we buy pieces of homeowners associations. We have covenants. Tell us how we can use our house, how we can use our property. The affirmative means that's positive, what we can do with it. Negative, maybe say we're restricted, we can't do certain things. That's the positive negative piece of it. And that is it for tonight. 7:30 and we're done. Any questions?
How does, say a utility company goes into, like their shopping, let's put an easement down, how do you determine the value of the easement? Or how does the utility just say, well, this is what we're going to pay you? Or as you being the property owner or whatever, how do you say, well, this is the value I believe it should be?
You can hire appraisers. Okay, when the utility company came back and they didn't offer us anything, we were willing to do it. Then because we fooled around so long, she finally said, well, we'll pay you $1,000. The asset manager said, sure, it cost me $1,000 for the legal fees. That's a reasonable cost. So it's what was the expense to get it done. Could be a reasonable cost to determine what it would cost. But much like, eminent domain, we hire appraisers to figure out what something's worth. If we're very reticent to let it happen, we might hire an appraiser, especially if they make an offer to us and we say, hell no, it's not worth that. Most of the time when Duke makes their offer, like I said, I saw them pay $10,000 to come across these people's land. They aren't going to be able to build a swimming pool there. $10,000 was a lot of money for those people. Is it a lot of money for them to sell it to somebody else and somebody else says, wait a minute, you know this yard, we could have built a swimming pool. It could come back later and be negative. You just don't know that. But yeah, they only pay it one time. They don't pay it every time the property sells. It's just paid the one time that they negotiate with. Okay. See y'all next week.